It has been said that a great athletic director doesn't just manage coaches. They mentor them, model integrity, and create a culture where leadership is contagious. Let's talk about leading the leaders on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have a returning guest to the podcast, Freed-Hardeman Athletic Director, Jonathan Estes. Coach, welcome to the program.
Appreciate it. Appreciate being back on. I know this is a great honor and a great privilege for me to be back after starting this thing off here a couple seasons ago.
I was going to say, Coach Estes was on the very first episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast back in season 1, and now he's on the very first one of season 3. I like to start off seasons with Coach Estes because he's such a great guest, and
I appreciate
a lot of good information to share on the last episode, and I know there'll be some great information to share this episode. For those that maybe don't know who you are, that maybe didn't listen to the last episode you were on, give us a little bit of background information about yourself before we get started.
Well, I'm a college baseball player by trade. Attended Division I school out of high school, St. Louis University, transferred to Freed-Hardeman, and finished up here, was drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals, and had a brief career with the St. Louis Cardinals in the minor leagues over 3 different levels, and discovered while I was playing that I wanted to coach. And so my dad had been a high school coach in the St. Louis high school area for many, many years, coached baseball, basketball, football, softball, did a little bit of everything. And so I had that in my blood, and discovered that it was really what I enjoyed, being around the game. So when I got done playing with the Cardinals, had a couple years I spent at the high school level. Have coached high school basketball for 5 years, high school baseball for a couple years, and then got my first college coaching job at Harris Stowe State University. Spent 3 years there, 13 years as head coach at Freed-Hardeman, and now starting my 4th year as the athletic director here. I've got 3 kids and have been very, very active coaching all of them all the way up, baseball, basketball, soccer. I've got a 10-year-old daughter now that I've been coaching for the last few years. So I've gotten a chance to do a little bit of everything from youth all the way up to college. I have just enjoyed and been blessed being around the game and the many lessons that it teaches. And oldest son will be a freshman playing college baseball.
Freed-Hardeman,
At Freed-Hardeman this fall. So we're excited about having kids at various levels now, college, high school, and still youth sports. So just enjoy being around all types of athletics. I enjoy all types of sports, and privileged to be here today to talk a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned in the last time we talked on the podcast was, I mentioned you were a college coach and then you transitioned to be an athletic director, and you've done that for the last few years now. One of the things you mentioned that kind of stuck with me is that you've never stopped coaching. Like you were a coach, baseball coach, but when you transitioned to the athletic director role, you just took on a different coaching role where you coach and mentor other coaches within the department. So you kind of taken on those responsibilities to really help some of these younger coaches. Freed-Hardeman has a lot of younger coaches now, probably more so than in years past. So it's kind of a learning process for them sometimes to have someone that has been through it like you. It's got to be something that's good for them. So when you first became athletic director a few years ago, what is something that maybe you had to learn pretty quickly about leading other people that are in leadership roles as well, like coaches?
Well, leading is at the fundamental level is about serving and bringing value to the people that you lead. And as a baseball coach at the collegiate level, when I had 65 guys in the program, I was trying to bring value and serve those players, trying to help them to hone their craft, to be better players. When I'm coaching my 10-year-old daughter's 3rd and 4th grade basketball team, it's about serving and bringing value to those players that you lead, and it doesn't change when you're leading other leaders. You're still trying to bring value to the people that you lead. You're still serving them. The fundamental principle of serving doesn't change as you move up or down the organizational chart. So I think leading other leaders looks a little bit different. You serve them in a little bit different way than maybe you serve players, but it's still about energizing them, pouring into them, supporting them, trying to help them to do the same things that you try to help your players do. So the biggest thing I guess I learned very quickly is really not any different at the fundamental level. Now, the day-to-day issues that you deal with is different, but I'm still trying to pour in and encourage and serve the leaders and support them and give them the tools that they need to be successful and to try to push them to be better. Just like your players, you try to push them every day. Sometimes they don't want to be pushed and you have to pull them. Sometimes you have to pick them up. Sometimes you have to give them a prompt to try to do something different. And it's the same thing with other leaders that you are leading, and you provide those same things. So it's really not different. Like I said, the day-to-day changes a little bit, but the fundamental of pouring into people and serving them does not change, no matter what level of leadership you're at.
Right. And we were talking a little bit before the podcast about personality styles. We found out a little bit about your Enneagram, what you are in Enneagram 3, all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of a guy that likes to do these assessments and things. How much does personality play into how you work with each of the coaches? Each coach is going to have a little bit different style, a little bit different personality. How did you learn how to deal with different people that had different personalities, different ways of doing things, how you relate to them and encourage them?
Well, knowing people and developing those relationships is very, very important. And it's no different when you're developing relationships with your players. Some players you can go, when I would go out and make a mound visit, I would have to encourage them.
Yeah.
Some of them I'd go out and I'd challenge them and just get in their face and just like really give it to them. And that's what they needed in that moment to make an adjustment. So it's no different when you're leading coaches. Everybody has different personality styles. They have different ways of dealing with day-to-day things that they're dealing with. So learning how to talk and how to encourage and when should I go in and talk to that coach? There's something that we need to talk about. Do I do it? Do I wait a couple days and do I go in and I talk about it and then come back a few days later and find, so it's just finding out, how each person manages different things and their personality, as you mentioned, and trying to deal with people on an individual level. And that's really, I think, one of the core tenets of leadership is developing relationships. You can't lead people that don't want to follow or don't want to be led. And so, developing those relationships is integral to having any type of influence.
Yeah. Thinking about qualities of coaches, a lot of times when we think about athletic departments, the one that seems to get all the praise or all the criticism when a hire is made or if something goes well or goes bad, that kind of a little bit falls on the athletic director because they're the ones making those decisions on who's hired and things like that. So when we think about the qualities that maybe you're looking for, places like Freed-Hardeman, other NAIA schools probably look at some other things besides just wins and losses a little more than other schools, just because you got to think about the culture, you got to think about character. So a lot of other things outside of just the wins and losses. So for you in particular, what qualities do you maybe look for when hiring coaches who will lead well?
You alluded to it earlier. We've got a lot of young coaches. I've had the opportunity just in the last 4 years to hire a lot of coaches. We've hired a sports information director, head cross country coach, golf, tennis, women's soccer, volleyball, women's basketball, baseball, esports, cheerleading. And then we've had 8 different assistant coaches over the last 4 years. So, I mean, that list right there, we've had a lot of people, and it doesn't change from person to person. We value character. We value that over X's and O's. And I really think that if people have the love for their players, they are in the mode that they want to develop and grow their players, that they have a really solid work ethic, they're going to learn X's and O's. They're going to learn what it takes in order to be successful, drawing up a game plan. But you have a much harder time teaching those character traits of work ethic and love and having a relationship. So we've really prioritized that. And, some of the coaches that we've hired, quite frankly, people have, they've been really shocked because the teams have been so successful so fast. And I really haven't been shocked when some of those things have happened because I know the character, the work ethic, the love, and the players love to play for coaches that they'll, if they have a coach that they'll run through a wall for, then they're going to play a lot harder than the coach that maybe knows all the X's and O's, but they don't want to be out there at practice. They don't want to be out there in the game. So we have the luxury of trying to find the right fit for our coaches. Just like when we recruit, we try to find the right fit of kids. Yeah. And so we've been really blessed to have great coaches with great character, and they all support the mission. We have a lot of coaches that attended Freed-Hardeman, or if they didn't attend Freed-Hardeman, they appreciate the mission, to develop our students' God-given abilities for His glory.
Yeah.
And so when you have people that are all on the same page, you can row that boat in the right direction.
Yeah, and this is a side note too. This is I can't remember on the press release I saw where Freed-Hardeman was a Gold Star institution, which is a Champions of Character award that is given. And I believe that there was quite a few of the schools in our conference also received this honor as well. But it just goes to show you that this is a department-wide thing. This is not just one sport receives an award. Freed-Hardeman is consistently the last 4 or 5 years has received the Gold Star, which is the top one, and maybe was a perfect score.
Perfect score, 100 out of 100. That's one of the things that we're extremely proud of. The last 3 years, all of our teams have been NAI scholar teams, which means that they have a 3.0 team GPA or higher. And our department-wide GPA this last spring was 3.47, which is borderline unbelievable to say that out loud and to listen to what I just said. We know 340 athletes averaging almost a 3.5 GPA is unbelievable. And so that just speaks to the character. And like you said, it's not all about wins and losses. We're trying to develop these people to be productive members of society, and having coaches that value that just as much, if not more, than the record is what we're looking for. Yeah.
And you mentioned a word earlier. You said this is something that's prioritized, right, within a department. And you think about all the different coaches that, the work in the department, you as kind of the person that ensures that some of these things are getting done. How do you, when you have so many different people you're working with, and this is a priority, how do you ensure that the department's culture and values filter down, not just to as a department as a whole, but each team? You mentioned that each coach has these values and tries to develop this culture. How do you do that from a managerial standpoint of these are the things that we need to do as a department? Each team needs to adhere to these values. What are some things, maybe practical things you do to make sure that's done?
To go back to the last point and the last question, when we interview coaches, that's one of the things that we talk about is just making sure that our coaches that we hire and we bring in are on board with our mission. And, it's important that you have a clearly articulated mission, value, and principles that you stand upon. And that's one of the things that we have discussed and defined within our department. We talk about it at all of our meetings. It's something that the coaches hear over and over again. It's something that when we have sessions with our teams, we talk about. So it's something that when you talk about culture is developed because of what happens day in and day out. It's not just something that, you get up one time a year and say, hey, this is who we're going to be. It's what you talk about every single day. And so it's that consistency that is very important. We push our coaches to set up those cultures within their program and, try to model those and live those out on a daily basis. And I also believe that you've got to advertise to yourself. So whatever it is that you want to be, you need to advertise that to yourself. So whether it be the branding that you put up, and one of the things that I've tried to do and we've done over the last couple of years is expand the branding, and there'll be some more stuff that people will see around campus, but just advertising who we are and who we want to be to ourselves, but also to other people. That helps to create that culture, and you'll get people to buy in at varying levels. But I really think, and that's one of the things when you talk to our coaches, they really love the culture of the athletic department, and I think that permeates into their teams. And it looks a little bit different between men's soccer and women's basketball, right, because you have different types of individuals and you have a different sport, but the overarching mission and those principles permeates throughout each and every program.
Yeah. In the first question, I asked you kind of some things you had to learn quickly. And one of the things you mentioned was leaders, in essence, what they're doing is serving. And that's very much a biblical principle as well. When we think about servant leadership, Jesus was one of the best servant leaders you could ever think of, washing people's feet, all these different things. Leaders, in essence, what they're doing is serving others. You might be serving these other coaches in ways that you can assist them and things like that. So I'm assuming a lot of that comes from your personal faith. How has your personal faith or character influenced how you lead and maybe how you expect others to lead, maybe taking on that servant role?
Well, as I've gotten older and I guess more mature through coaching and then obviously in the athletic director role, it's become more and more apparent that this is what I've been called to do, is to try to serve other people in the way that in and the role and the opportunity that God's given me to do that. So, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about, I can't separate who I am as a Christian from who I try to be as an athletic director. And I think it's, you talked about Jesus, and he led the apostles, and we see examples of where they didn't always understand or get it the first time, or they struggled and they messed up, and he continued to teach, and he continued to be patient with them, and he continued to push them. And it's the same thing that leaders that we're called to do is like our kids aren't always going to get it the first time. They don't. Right. We have to tell them over and over again. Our players aren't going to get it. And even sometimes our coaches struggle to make adjustments or get caught into bad habits, or maybe don't do things that they're supposed to be doing. And as a person of faith, we give them grace. We approach that situation and we try to help them grow and push them in the right direction. So I think that those things are married together, who we try to be as servants and as leaders, and we do that with and try to be just like Jesus was.
Yeah. And speaking specifically about the things that you would do, you mentioned that sometimes you have to, maybe this is something that some coaches might struggle with initially as far as developing some of these things, not just having that wins and losses mindset, but focusing on some of these other things. So is there anything particular that maybe advice you give to young coaches that maybe you're struggling a little bit with trying to focus so much on those wins and losses and not focusing enough on maybe some of these other things such as character and values and things like that? Any advice that you give if there's any advice you've ever had to give to someone that maybe has been struggling with that?
Well, two things that I talk about a lot, and it doesn't matter if they're struggling or if they're not, is number one is to concentrate on the process and not the results. There are things that we can control, and there's things that we can't control. So, controlling the controllables, and we can control our attitude and our preparation and our effort. We can't control the results a lot of times. So it's that process that I really encourage our coaches to focus on. The wins will come when you're doing things the right way.
Yeah.
When you put the right people in the right situations and you're doing things, and really the game will reward you on its timetable, not on your timetable. So, just focusing on serving and loving and being the right thing and being the right person and being the right program and having the right culture, if those are the things that you're focusing on, the wins will follow. And it was cool during 2018 season when in baseball, when we went to the World Series for the first time in school history and made a run to the national championship game. I felt like that year we focused less on baseball and more on culture and loving each other and things of that nature. And it was interesting to me, and it was a real learning experience that was the most success that we had ever had. Yeah. And we focused on being successful baseball-wise the least amount that year, and that parlayed into a really successful 2019 season going back to the World Series. 2020, we were headed in the same trajectory before COVID hit, and 2021, 2022, back to the national tournament. So when you focus on the right things, when you concentrate on the process and not the results, then you're usually going to be more successful. So that's my advice, not only to young coaches, but to old coaches, young players, everybody, is just control the things that you can control. And usually things will work out the way they're supposed to. And even if they don't, you can't control that anyway.
Yeah. Right. So thinking about, you mentioned earlier, in order for someone to want to be led by someone, they have to respect them. So respect is a big part of this. I think trust is another aspect that, the coaches that you lead and help and assist and all these things, they have to trust that you have their best interest in mind and all these different things. So there's obviously times, though, that maybe are not always great. Athletic director, there might be some tough decisions that you have to make as far as coaches. So how do you build trust and have them kind of adhere to these values that you want them to adhere to while still maybe have to hold them accountable? Maybe they don't do everything right and you have to maybe correct them. How do you balance that with still having that respect and trust, but also holding them accountable?
Well, I think trust is built through, a couple things. One is being consistent, not overreacting, not underreacting. It's just being consistent and here are our expectations. And when you veer and go off from that, then there may be a conversation that needs to happen. Being honest. One of the quotes that I love and took from John Wooden, he said, "I'd rather a player be mad at me for a couple days because I told him the truth than to be mad at me in 30 years because I told him a lie."
Yeah.
And so it's the same way I tried to approach that with my players when I coach them, and now with coaches, I don't want to act like everything's okay when it's not, because later on there's going to be regret and disappointment. And sometimes it's tough to have a hard conversation right now, but you have that, and usually people grow. And if you're consistent and you're honest and you communicate, articulate what the expectations are, and have consistent feedback on how they're meeting or not meeting those expectations, those conversations are a lot easier to have when there's consistency.
And you have that relationship.
And you have that relationship. If I tell you, hey, here's what my expectations are, and then I don't revisit until a year later, and you've done 49 things wrong, and I've never addressed those, then
why are you all of a sudden coming to me telling me all these 50 things I did wrong?
Yeah, it's like, what in the world, But if we talk about it after number one, then it's going to be a lot easier conversation on number two. And hopefully we'll never get to 49 if that's the process.
Yeah. So thinking about too, we think about, and you might have touched on this a little bit with the talking about being honest and different things. Maybe what are some common leadership mistakes that you see in coaches? And it could be something where maybe they have to learn that they need to be more honest with players, in certain situations, they learn the hard way on some of those things. But any other things that maybe come to mind, leadership mistakes that you see, maybe in younger coaches even, that maybe they just don't know some of the things just yet that you have to kind of coach them and help them on as far as leadership goes?
Well, two of the things that I see sometimes are stubbornness, thinking that we have all the answers and don't look for help, or we don't listen to people that are trying to help us. That's one of the things. Being coachable is something that we look for in players. We want players that want to be coached, because we're going to coach them up. And if they listen to the things that we say to them as a coach, then they're going to be a lot better player. And it's the same thing as coaches. We have to be coachable when people come and talk to us about maybe some ways that we can improve. So, people that are stubborn, that think they have it all figured out, and one of the ways that I try to deal with some of those situations is just asking questions of those coaches, helping myself understand and helping them to talk through situations so that maybe they realize that they don't have the solution or they don't have all the answers, trying to get to the bottom of it. Another one that is big is sometimes we aren't accountable for our mistakes. And we all make mistakes. We all struggle. We all do the wrong thing from time to time. And it's very important that we acknowledge when we struggle, when we make mistakes, that we say, hey, I made a mistake, that we learn and we grow from it, and we try to improve. And sometimes you see young coaches or young leaders, they think that mistakes are a sign of weakness. So they
double down and
they'll double down and act like, hey, no, I made the right decision. When I used to go out and talk to umpires and discuss calls that I may not have agreed with, sometimes you'd go out and talk to an umpire that clearly made the wrong call, and they would double down and say, no, I saw it and I got it right. And you'd walk back to the dugout with little respect for that umpire versus the one who you went out there and they said, hey, I was in bad position. I might have missed that. I missed that one, or I might have missed it because I was in bad position. I couldn't argue. I could just say, hey, try to do a better job getting in better position next time or whatever. So I have a lot more respect for those umpires that said, hey, I may have missed that, or I may not have got that right, or whatever the case might be. So, just understanding that we don't have all the answers, that other people may have perspectives that we don't, that may help us in situations, and then just being big enough and mature enough to say, hey, I made a mistake, and I'm accountable. I need to do better in that area, are two things that I think would help a lot of leaders to not only develop the trust, going back to the previous question and comment, building that trust and consistency and honesty with the people that we lead, but also the people that are around us that are evaluating us and looking to see if this is a person that I want to be led by.
Yeah, I mean, and you would think your players would respect you a lot more, even though that a lot of times coaches probably think this is showing a sign of weakness by me admitting that I'm wrong. It's got to be encouraging to your players to hear like, hey, he's willing to admit when he messed up. I need to be more willing to admit when I mess up with my teammates, with whatever it is that's going on. It's got to encourage them to maybe be a little bit more honest with themselves as well, I would think.
Yeah, I went through a period. I'd read Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, and there would be times at the end of the game where we would lose 4-3, and I would apologize to the team. Hey, I made the wrong decision right there. I could have made a better pitch call right there, whatever. And it was interesting, me trying to take ownership of some of the mistakes that I'd made coaching or some of the decisions that I had made with the team. A lot of times they'd come back and say, no, coach, that was that wasn't your fault. Like, I
Yeah.
should have executed the pitch. You know,
Yeah.
that wasn't the wrong pitch call. That was the wrong execution. And so when you model that behavior that, hey, I messed up and I'm going to do better next time, your players and the people that you lead, they start to model that same
Yeah.
accountability. And that's when really good things start to happen.
Yeah. One of the questions I had on here too, we might have touched on this already, is when you're evaluating whether a coach is leading effectively, maybe their effectiveness as a coach, or whatever it is, beyond the wins and losses. I think maybe one of the ways that came to my mind was, well, you can tell a lot about the culture of a team by its players, right? If a coach is leading in a certain way, the players are going to be responding to that coach in a certain way. They're going to live their life a certain way. They're going to play the game a certain way. So maybe it's just as simple as you can evaluate a lot about the leadership of a team by the players and how they respond. But anything else that comes to your mind when thinking about how you evaluate the leadership effectiveness of coaches?
Now, you're exactly right. Coach McCutcheon, my predecessor as athletic director at Freed-Hardeman, used to say, we'd talk about excellence, and he said, excellence is one of those things that when you see it, you know it. And it's the same thing with teams who are being led in the right way. You see that team, the way that they interact, not only on the court or on the field, but off the court, off the field, how they go through adversity, how they take advantage of opportunities, how they treat their opponents, how they treat the facilities workers that are cleaning up or doing things. You can just see how they go about their business in the restaurants and the hotels. You see all that, and you see excellence and know that it's there and know that they're being led in the right way and that they're buying into that vision. So excellence isn't just, hey, we had a great year because we went 30-5. It transcends the record and goes to every single aspect. What type of student athletes are they? Talking about what they're doing in the classroom, what they're doing in the community. And when you have a bunch of different people, I tell you, we've had the Roar Awards the last few years where we've honored our student athletes, and we have 3 different awards that each team gives out. One of them is best teammate, one of them is best Christian example, one of them is the team MVP, and the teammates vote for those. And what's been really cool to see is that you will have, for instance, on the volleyball team, they might have 16 players, and you'll have 14 different players that'll get votes for best teammate. Well, in that situation that's a really good culture when you have so many different people that others are looking at and saying, that's a great teammate, that's a person that I want to follow. That's a really great culture situation versus if every vote went to 1 or 2 different people, then, that just shows that, hey, we're really top heavy, but we don't have depth when it comes to really great culture. So, excellence is something that stands out when you see it, and it's something that you can evaluate just by opening your eyes and seeing how things are going on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And it's got to make those winning, like you said, more special, because like you talking about your 2018 team that you had, the wins, they came, but it was more special because of the players that you were coaching, the excellence they were showing, the culture they were kind of developing, and the love they had for each other. It's got to make it a lot more special to have that on top of the wins. You also have all that camaraderie and togetherness as a team as well, I would think.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to do something and be successful at it when you don't enjoy the people that you're doing it with. If you're not enjoying the environment, it's going to be really hard to be successful. And so those are, having a great culture, I think is a prelude to being successful on the field.
Yeah. Thinking about some challenges that come along with leadership, whether in athletic departments or just in organizations in general. Specifically for athletic departments, though, what are some challenges that maybe you see coming for athletic departments, maybe over the next 4 or 5 years, you would say? I know there's a lot of changes taking place, NCAA, NAIA, all the different levels. What are some challenges you see coming?
Well, if you follow what's going on in the culture of college athletics, everybody's talking nationally about, NIL and transfers and money and payouts to players. And really that only affects, about 14% of colleges. I think there's 1,800 colleges and universities that support athletics. You're talking about 250 schools that are benefiting or are being, by that settlement and giving, paying their players and things like that. So the media attention is all on things that we don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. We're not recruiting kids that are concerned about making 6 figures playing basketball. We're recruiting kids that want to buy into the culture and the mission that we've talked about already previously in this podcast. So I think some of the challenges are for athletic departments is we have to tell our story. We have to tell people who we are and what we stand for, because what I see on ESPN and in the national media isn't what's happening in our universities, the 86% that aren't involved in that. So I think that's one of the challenges is to tell our story, tell people who we are, how we differentiate. We're trying to bring players in and to graduate and stay here for 4 years and to become productive members of society. And that's really not what the message is at the highest level. So that's one of the things that I think that we have to educate recruits. We have to educate the community. We have to educate parents. We have to educate our donors. We have to educate a lot of people. And to me, that's potentially the biggest challenge for athletic departments over the next few years, is just making sure that the narrative for us isn't what the narrative is for those few schools that are, making millions and millions and millions of dollars playing, in bowl games and for national championships at the highest level.
Yeah. One of the things that came to my mind, like you mentioned, was recruiting. That's got to be a challenge for not necessarily, as probably the coaches would deal with this directly with the individual teams they're coaching. I talked with Drew Stutz, the basketball coach at Freed, and he said it's becoming harder and harder when you have so many kids maybe in the transfer portal that you might be looking at some that find someone that's going to fit the culture of the team, right? You have so many, he said a lot of times you have people in the transfer portal, and sometimes there's a reason they're in the transfer portal. Maybe they didn't fit well with a certain team. He said, you got to really figure out, are they going to fit well with our culture here, right? And he said the biggest challenge with recruiting is like you said, telling the story, telling the narrative of what we're about to make sure that they're going to fit that. Because if they don't, it's going to be a really long year. And he said he's had challenges with that with players he's brought in before, and it can just really damage a team if you have the wrong people in the wrong places. It can really hurt the team atmosphere, I guess.
Yeah, you've seen that in youth sports start to happen over the last 10 years or so, where, when I was playing growing up, we played for the same summer team, for 4 years in a row, freshman through senior year. Nowadays, you have kids that are coming out, they've played for 2 or 3 different teams per summer sometimes.
No loyalty.
There's no loyalty. It's all about, hey, I'm going to go do this or I'm going to go do that because this is what's best for me. And you have a very transactional mindset for some of these athletes and some of their parents, as well, that, hey, I'm going to just go where the situation's best for me. And if it's not best for me here right now, I'll go do something else. So we're seeing more and more of that. I follow teams that are playing at the highest level, and we've got transfers that are playing at their 5th and 6th schools, this fall for football. And that's just unbelievable to think about that compared to where we were just a few years ago. So that's the culture that we're in. And like you said, and Drew Stutz, talked about, it's more and more important to find the right people that buy into what we're trying to do and aren't just making transactional decisions, but they're making decisions because they want to be transformed, because they want to have transformational opportunities.
Yeah. So if you could give one piece of advice to other athletic directors, this is kind of, I guess, a closing kind of thought here. If you could give one piece of advice to other athletic directors trying to lead their leaders well, what would be some things you would tell them?
Well, we've talked about a lot of these things. Lead with vision, define what success is within your program and lead with that vision in the forefront. Prioritize the people. We talked about relationships. Develop those relationships and really prioritize those. Model character and consistency. We talked about that. Just be the same person every single day. Communicate. Collaborate all across campus. I think that's very, very important to work with every single department on campus to try to push the entire university forward. This isn't all about FHU athletics. This is about Freed-Hardeman University. Yeah. And what we're doing in the athletic department can push the entire university forward. So, collaboration is very important. Be visible, be engaged, be at a lot of different places. I try to go to chapel, try to go to making music and all different types of things all over campus. So be visible, be engaged with what's going on. We talked about telling your story, just encourage other athletic directors, control the narrative of who you are, what makes you special. Tell that story to your constituents, to your student athletes, to your parents, to your donors, and just emphasize the student athlete experience. We're trying to provide a fantastic student athlete experience, give them the resources that they need to go out to be outstanding husbands and wives, outstanding leaders in their communities, outstanding church leaders, parents. We just want to give them all the tools that they can have in order to be productive members of society. And I think if we're doing those things, then we are pouring into and serving and leading the way that we're called to be led.
Yeah. Great thoughts. Appreciate you coming on, Coach. Appreciate all the work you're doing at Freed-Hardeman. Obviously, you've worked at Freed-Hardeman for, going on 17 years.
My 17th year. Yeah.
So appreciate all the work you've done coaching, as well as the work you've taken on with being athletic director. Most of the years that you've been athletic director, we've been a gold star. So, just we can keep that going forward. Not just wins and losses, but also the character and all those values that we're instilling, hopefully, in the players as well. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come in.
Appreciate you having me, Matt, and go Lions.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Jonathan Estes for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join me for our next episode as I talk with Freed-Hardeman Professor of Kinesiology, Mr. Maurice Williams, on the topic of the character workout. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.